What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on our 2021 Volkswagen Atlas SE. Today on the Atlas, we are going to be covering some suspension refresh. Now, you may see we have a ton of parts in front of us, all of which are available on fcpo.com. But for the purpose of today's DIY, we are going to be focusing strictly on the front end of the Atlas, meaning how to replace your front struts. At the same time, we will be installing part of a B2B Fab Complete Lift Kit. We have a camber correction kit, which is going to go up there. However, the torque specs and everything you need to know for your standard replacement at home is going to be covered and applied in this DIY. And if you want to play along and lift your Atlas as well, we'll be covering that too. A little bit more of a fun build side of things that we're going to be doing more on the FCP Euro Media YouTube channel. So if you want to see that, be sure to subscribe there as well. Typically, front struts can last you anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. That's not to say that depending on the type of driving you do, they can either last longer or fail sooner than later. Typically, the struts are what you're going to replace. The springs are always typically reusable unless they have rusted or cracked and failed, which is a possibility. Whenever you're doing strut assemblies, we always recommend new strut mounts and bearings. These are a wear item like anything else, made of rubber and metal. And over time, these can fail and lead to clunks while you're driving, and or in extreme cases, make it really hard to turn your steering wheel left and right, as these bearings can fail over time and wear out, causing your steering to bind up. Just something to keep in mind. With this, we also have hardware, which is one-time use for the most part, all of which is linked in the video description below. If you're installing the B2B Fab Lift Kit like we are in a bigger feature DIY, they offer a hardware kit as well, which is included in their complete kit, but we also have individual listings for all of it on the site on fcpo.com. Before we get into it too much though, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. All right, for this DIY, we have a couple torque wrenches, both a 1/2-inch drive and 3/8 drive. I have a 3/8 drive ratchet and a 1/4 inch as well. I have a couple of extensions for both of those, ranging from a 3-inch to a 5-inch. We also have a couple adapters from 1/2-inch to 3/8 and 3/8 to 1/2-inch. As far as wrenches go, we have an 18 mil wrench. I have both a long ratcheting one and pass-through socket set, which is CTA 7466. Always comes in handy when you're doing end links or any suspension work like strut assembly or disassembly, which is something we're going to be using today. We'll show you what socket sizes and hex bits we use out of that. As far as sockets themselves go, we have a 17, a 16, a 13, and a 10. Specialty sockets, we have triple square. This is going to be for the large pinch bolt on the strut side of things. That's going to be an M14. We have a T25. We have a 6 mil hex, an M6 triple square. We have a spindle spreader tool. This is a Hazit tool. There's a couple variations out there. If you don't have one of these, a chisel will work as well. And then for the axle bolts, we have a large 12.24 mil socket. We have a flathead screwdriver, which we're going to use as a small pry bar. We have a hammer, some bungee cords, some power tools, and then we have some torque seal and a paint marker, as well as some liquid moly ceramic paste and some anti-seize. That's going to come in handy when we assemble everything later. Not pictured here, but needed is going to be a free floor jack or screw jack, depending on whether you're working on the lift or the ground. And then last and most important bit for this whole DIY is going to be a spring compressor tool. You want to have a good tool to do this job. Now, with that being said, if you are not familiar, haven't done this before, or simply don't have the proper tool, and you are afraid of doing it, just be mindful you can hurt yourself whenever you're compressing springs. It can be dangerous. If you just don't want to do it, that's totally okay. You can do everything else. Take the little bit of money you're saving on the DIY and bring the strut assemblies to your local shop, have them disassemble and assemble your new ones for you. Otherwise, if you have the tool, follow along. It is pretty straightforward as long as you have the right tools. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, today we are going to be focusing on the passenger side of the vehicle. It's going to be the same steps for the driver's side. The only thing that may change depending on how your vehicle is equipped is if you have the headlight level sensor attached to your driver's side control arm, which this vehicle does not have, but we can kind of give you a rough idea of where that would be. You would want to undo those before you start pulling down on the control arms on the driver's side. With that, we have 5 17mm lug bolts to remove, so let's zap those out. All right, now we have our wheel off, we have a better view of what we're gonna be working with. We have a couple things to detach so that we can pull the whole spindle assembly down once we're ready to separate it from the strut. The first thing we're gonna wanna start with is this axle bolt right here. So we're gonna thread in a lug bolt, which helps just kind of keep the hub assembly from spinning freely from the disc. More important when you're tightening everything back down, but still good practice to do while you're taking things apart. For that, we're gonna need our 24 mil 12-point socket. Then I like to just use the bolt and just push the axle through, make sure that it's gonna come out. This is garbage, they're one-time use, so be sure not to reuse those. All right, now that we have our axle bolt undone, we can go ahead and get a little bit more eye level with the car. We have a sway bar end link to undo. Now, because we have already replaced these on a different DIY for the control arm video, and we are installing the B2B lift kit, we're gonna be removing the end link with the strut assembly, as we're not gonna be reusing these end links. So we're gonna remove it from the sway bar end, but the process is exactly the same if you're just gonna remove it from the strut end as well. So either one will be fine. If you're replacing them, which is also a good idea if you haven't done them already, then you'll want to remove them from both ends. So with that, let's get a little bit closer. We'll get that end link undone and we'll get the bracket for the soft line and wheel speed sensor undone as well. We have a 10 mil bolt that is holding down this bracket for our wheel speed sensor and our soft line right there. We're just going to go ahead and undo that now. That way that can be free and give us some slack once we drop the spindle from the strut assembly. 10 mil socket. Once you get it started, you can take it off the rest of the way by hand. Just set that to the side, or you can thread it back in. I'm just gonna set it to the side for now, or drop it into the abyss. All right, with that free, we are going to work on our sway bar end link next. If you wanna do the pinch bolt now too, you can. It's not gonna drop anywhere because of the grip that the spindle has around the strut assembly, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's take care of our end link. For the end link, you're gonna need an 18 mil wrench or pass-through socket and an M6 triple square to counter hold. I'm gonna use an M6 on my 1/4 inch ratchet. Just make sure that that bit is sitting all the way in before you go to remove it, so you don't strip the end of the counter hold and then have a bad time taking this off. While I have you down here, we're also gonna undo the 3 16mm nuts. These are also one-time use. Just keep that in mind, and they are included in the suspension nut and bolt kit from B2B Fab, and or you can get them separately on fcpro.com as well. All right, while I have that nice and free and I have you down here, we're gonna pull down the arm, separate the arm from the spindle for a moment, and that's gonna allow us to pull it out enough to remove the axle from the spindle assembly and then just push it off to the side, so that way it's not binding us up. From there, we can move on to the pinch bolt, so let's go ahead and free that up next. We have our M14 side head of the bolt and an 18 mil nut. We're gonna counter hold with a wrench and then blast off the bolt on the other side. Penetrating fluid goes a long way if these bolts are looking crusty. You can see where the rust line is. This lives inside of the knuckle. This was exposed. These can tend to get stuck in here over time, so we're gonna goop it up with some ceramic paste on the new one before going back together. With the spreader tool or the chisel, you're gonna have to relocate it a couple times. There's a little locating fin on the back of these assemblies that can get in your way. So pretty standard on Volkswagens and other German makes. Sometimes they're a little dowel, but in this case it's a fin. So we'll get as far as we can and then reposition if we need to. This is gonna spread the knuckle open. Again, if you have the ball joint undone down here from the arm, that's gonna give you way more flex too, if you wanna do it that way. Either one, depending on how strong you're feeling, or if you have a second set of hands or a floor jack underneath this. All right, at this point, our spindle is free from the strut assembly. Again, if you're working on the ground versus the lift, you can just have a spare floor jack under here to kind of help keep the weight off of this. And if you have bungee cords, perfect. But you just want these to be nice and loose. Now we're gonna get up into the engine bay, get underneath the cowl, and get this old strut assembly out so that we can take it apart and build our new strut assembly. All right, now it's time to access the three 13mm bolts that hold the whole strut assembly or strut mount to the strut tower. We're gonna start by removing the weather stripping. You don't have to pull it all the way off if you don't want to. If you're doing one side at a time, that's good enough for us right now. This little foam piece is gonna stay here. We're just gonna gently pull it forward enough so that we can clear the cowl. And then we're gonna lift up and gain access to the 313s. So let's grab our extension and our ratchet and get those out. All right, we're gonna take this over to the workbench. We need to recover a couple parts from it, so let's do that now. All right, we have our old strut assembly here. We're gonna be saving the spring from it. Depending on the age and mileage on your car and the condition of these parts, you can sometimes reuse the lower spring perch. We have a new one here. So we're gonna install this. They're fairly inexpensive and it's just good insurance. But again, if they're in good shape, you can reuse something like this. Same thing with the bellow on this one. We're gonna save this one for our Atlas. We are gonna be throwing a new bump stop in it. However, these tend to deteriorate or fall apart over time, especially if you're replacing really worn suspension. There's a good chance these are destroyed. And again, cheap insurance. Of course, new strut mounts and bearings are always gonna be a must whenever you're doing any suspension work like this. Let's take this one apart first. So we're gonna compress the spring with our spring compressor. I'm gonna get this baby lined up like so. Make sure that that spring catches inside of the grooves of the tool nicely so that it doesn't shoot out and hurt us. And then once we have it compressed, we can work on breaking that nut off. All right, this is where our CTA pass-through socket set is gonna come in handy. 21mm socket. We're gonna use our counter hold 7mm hex bit. Let that rest like so. And the goal is that this is gonna be passing through the socket, holding the center of the shaft, keeping that from spinning while we break the nut free. And as you can see, this bump stop is still in pretty good shape. Again, the car is only 3 years old, but it does have 70,000 miles. And these still have a little bit of life left in them. So you could reuse something like this again, but cheap insurance. Same thing with the spring perch. Let's get rid of this old strut assembly. Let's clean up our area a little bit and let's get our new one in here ready for assembly. Here's our new bearing. These bearings are keyed so that they only go one way on your strut top. You'll notice the strut top has a little key on it too. When you go to put these together, this is more important when you're letting the spring compressor off and everything's gonna sandwich tightly. You wanna make sure that these are sitting like so. Nice little happy sandwich, aligning everything so that everything sits properly. These also have an arrow inside of them. These are gonna be the interior 2 bolts, if you will, pointing towards the front and back of the vehicle. Again, more crucial once it's actually being bolted up in the car and or if you're doing the lift kit, bolting on the spacer and camber correcting kit. Our bellow is going to live on this inner lip inside of the bearing. Once you get it popped on in place, it'll stay on and that way it doesn't droop or hang it down and expose the shaft. Just keeps some debris and dirt off of the shaft on the shock. We're gonna take our new strut assembly. On this lower spring perch, you're gonna see that there's a stop here, and that is where the end of the coil spring, the flat spot, is gonna butt up to. So when you install your spring perch pad, you wanna make sure that the stop on this also lines up with this one right here. So these can only go on one way, and they just sit in place. Can be a little bit tedious as you're assembling everything, but it's really only important to make sure they're in the right place right before the spring is fully decompressed. I'm gonna take our new locking nut off of our Bilstein here, take the washer off for a moment. Bump stop can go on. That's beautiful there. And now we're gonna feed this through our spring assembly, which is still on the spring compressor on the table. You can put the bump stop on after, it really doesn't matter. And then the fun part here is gonna be keeping this pad from continuously falling off while you're trying to get this on. Again, not the end of the world in the interim. That's fine there. And then what I'm gonna do is just stand this up for a moment with the spring and everything in place. Don't be afraid to get a second set of hands in here while you're doing this. These things can be tedious and heavy, and especially if you have a spring compressor like the one that we're working with, which is probably better, definitely better than the little clamp guys. What we're gonna do now Just keep that lined up. This strut mount assembly, remember the arrows pointing front and back. We're going to make sure that those are kind of lined up with this little tab back here to keep everything kind of in line, if you will. We're going to get our 7mm hex in place. And we're going to switch to our 22mm socket for the Bilstein unit, or the locking nut size for that. We're going to snug these babies up. Torque spec for the 22mm nut is only 60 Newton meters. Not a whole lot. Something you can easily achieve just bottoming out the nut and giving it a little bit of a snug. You don't want to break your tool or strip that counter hold. All right, at this point that is tight. Now I'm going to lift this back up, line everything up, and undo the spring compressor. Just enough to where everything's bound up, and then we can lie it down and remove it the rest of the way. So right now I'm just working on making sure that bottom spring perch is in the right place along with the spring. I'll show you what that looks like. Here's our stop on the spring perch. Here's the stop on the spring perch pad and the coil. Up top, I'm going to make sure that this bearing and strut mount are, it's not super critical, but just lined up with the lower tab back here. But you do want to make sure that these two sit nicely into each other. That's going to be the most important part when loosening up the spring compressor. I'm going to keep these like this, and now I'm going to loosen everything enough so that the spring takes up a little bit of tension, and then we can lie this thing down. Now with that, we have a freshly built strut assembly ready to go back in the car. Just making our way around the strut top to make sure that everything looks proper and seated correctly. Before we get our strut assembly in here, I'm just going to clean this up a bit with some Scotch-Brite. You can use some emery cloth or some, not super aggressive sandpaper, a wire wheel on a drill bit, just to clean up some of the oxidation. It'll help seat the new strut assembly a whole lot easier. It's really just the edges that are a little crusty. And then we'll clean them up. You can use a little bit of ceramic paste, some anti-seize, a little bit of dielectric grease if that's all you have, just to help guide the strut body in. I'm going to lower this down and put a floor jack underneath it to help support it. And because we're going with the lift kit, it's a little bit tougher than if you were just installing a regular strut assembly without the spacers. You don't have quite enough room to be able to get the strut assembly into the tower first and then try to feed the knuckle in, at least not without fighting it too much. If you're just going standard strut, then you should have more than enough room to get those 313 started and then slide this up onto your strut assembly. My goal for this is going to be to attempt doing it with the strut assembly in the knuckle first or in the spindle first, and then feeding it into the strut tower, lifting it up with the floor jack. So let's give that a shot first. Again, this is all clean, ready to go. Just make sure your ABS sensor, your soft line is all in front of the spindle / strut housing first before you button everything up. I have the ball joint out of the lower control arm right now. I have the bottom of my shock body greased up. Again, keeping an eye on that soft line and ABS line. All right, I'm going to reposition the spreader tool so I can get the strut assembly in the rest of the way. If I didn't say this already, I have the ball joints out of the arm. The whole spindle is resting on the floor jack. But again, keep in mind that I don't put too much stress on that soft line and ABS cable. Still have a ways to go in getting the strut seated all the way in. It's an incredibly tight fit, but what I'm doing now is I am raising up the car a little bit so I can swing the strut assembly in, get it just hanging out in here in the strut tower, and I'm going to get the ball joint pulled situated back into the control arm. So this is what we have so far for the passenger side. We have the front left wheel turned all the way right. That has shortened, if you will, the tie rod end, allowing us to have more room to get the whole strut assembly into the strut tower. Again, it's just hanging out in here. And then lift it up enough to get the ball joint studs, at least one of them, onto the lower control arm. That's going to keep everything from drooping. It's going to keep all that happy. So from now, what we're going to do is just leave that the way it is, come up top, get our 313 started, snug those up, and then we can worry about repositioning the ball joint, the axle, all that good stuff. We still have a little bit more to go as far as seating the strut assembly in. It's an incredibly tight fit. You can still see that the new bolt will not go through all the way. The little tab that helps align everything is still in there. So it's super tedious. This is probably one of the more challenging struts to install. All right, I got my floor jack underneath my control arm. I have my light in here and the old tie rod holding up the cowl. I'm gonna jack it up until I can start seeing the bolt holes, and then we'll get the 313 started and snug them up. We're gonna torque these babies down to 30 Newton meters. All right, we still have a bit of ways to go getting that strut fully seated in the spindle. I'm gonna create or recreate what we've been doing with the floor jack underneath, but with the screw jack so we can get it up in the air and give you a better view of exactly what we're doing. All right, back up in the air, just to show you a little bit better what we're working with here is just getting the strut assembly to sit all the way flush into the spindle. You can see the gap that we have here. This must be all the way down. That's the stop there, which will also allow this fin to go all the way down, allowing us to put the pinch bolt through. So the main problem I'm having here is that the spreader tool is not spreading this enough. Ideally, I'd want it right where the fin is right now, which is not ideal, so that we can get this in the rest of the way through. So first thing we're gonna do, now that the strut assembly is suspended up top, is get our ball joint studs, just all three of them in the lower control arm. Again, axle's still out of the way. We can deal with that one later, not a problem. We're gonna feed the ball joint back in. Now I'm gonna see if we can get this tool positioned in a way where it'll allow us to spread the knuckle enough and have it seat the rest of the way. Little pry bar action, and it's shot down the rest of the way. With how tight that fit is, I am very confident that I can lower the screw jack and nothing is gonna move. But if you want to be extra safe, you can throw that pinch bolt in now. Just make sure you have whatever spreader tool you used removed. We're going to feed in that pinch bolt. You can see I have it gooped up where the nut will not be doing its thing. So where it's going to live in the strut and pinch area. So that hopefully in the next X amount of years, when this gets serviced again, it's super easy to get this bolt out. New hardware, of course, one-time use. All right. Let's snug this baby up. I'm gonna torque this to an initial 70 Newton meters first. Again, M14, 18 mil to counterhold. All right, and then I'm gonna make a mark with my Sharpie so that I know once I've done a 180-degree rotation. 290s works as well. And we are torqued up. Now while I have you here, we're just gonna free up our ball joint once more, get this axle back in its home. Make sure those splines are lining up here on the wheel hub. You can always rotate the disc a little bit and then it should slide right in. Bam, baby. All right, let's get these 316 started back up. We have some freshies that come in our kit, but again, they're one-time use. So whether you're doing the lift kit or not, or buying their hardware kit or not, we still have these available on the site and recommend you replace them every time. We're going to torque these to 40 Newton meters, these 316s, then give them an additional 45 degrees or an eighth of a turn. All right, with our ball joint situated, we're gonna take care of our new axle bolt now. Again, make sure it has the thread locker already on it. This is a 24 mil 12 point. I'm just gonna snug it up using the 3/8 thread ratchet. Now we're gonna do the same thing we did when we were removing it. We're gonna thread in a lug bolt to help with the hub spinning separate from the brake disc. We're gonna lock up the brake disc. You can also have someone hop inside and step on the brake pedal if you have a, we'll call him a helper in the garage that isn't doing much of anything. We're gonna set our torque wrench to 200 meters, do the initial torque on that first, and then an additional 90 degrees. Okay. We have two more things left. We have the sway bar end link and we have the bracket for our lines. So let's do the sway bar end link now. We'll get it started here at the bottom on the sway bar side of things and feed it into the strut assembly and then go from there. For the factory end link, your torque spec is going to be 40 Newton meters plus an additional 45 degrees. Again, factory M6 triple square to counter hold, 18 millimeter nut, so you can use a wrench. All right, we're gonna lower it down, do the same thing up on the strut. We have strut assembly in, end link back in, our ball joint situated. We have our axle bolt situated. Now we have the little bracket for our ABS cable and our soft line. So let's get that 10 mil situated again. And back here, you'll notice that speed sensor cable, ABS cable runs next to the hard line. There's a little tab here. Feel free to clip that back in if it popped out on you. $10 socket, we're just gonna snug that baby up. Don't need to crank it that hard. It's just holding down the bracket. And we'll mark it again so we know that we did it. All right, with that, let's get the car into a more eye level position. Get the wheel back on, go from there. All right, at this point, we're gonna get our lug bolts back in, started by hand. We're gonna snug them up in a crisscross pattern to make sure that the wheel's flush against the hub. Then we'll drop the car down and torque them in the same crisscross pattern to 140 Newton meters. Otherwise, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Again, a pretty straightforward process and easy enough to follow even if you're not installing the lift kit at home. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. And if you want to see more on the build, be sure to head over to the FCPO Media YouTube channel, subscribe to see more there. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.